record. There we go, recording in progress. Okay, so I am Tim Lightfellow on tier Barony of Wildwood. I put this class together to discuss arrow and crossbow bolt maintenance. Just things you can do. I'm going to try to go over both what you can do in the field and what you can do at home with perhaps better tools available at home. And as I mentioned before we started recording, if anyone has a different way of doing something, please share, and that way we can share the most variety of different ways that possible. Okay, so I want to start with arrow straightening because that's probably the more common task that we need to do and that I always forget to do and fall behind on, especially with all of Wildwood's loaners. So I am going to have to angle my camera down to show the table. So one moment while things get a bit rocky. Okay, hopefully that lets you see. So what I typically use is this. It's called an arrow checker or arrow tester. I haven't seen this exact one lately, but there are several versions of this, and I've even seen some Lego versions where they'll set up a Lego set with the wheels so that they can roll. The idea is that you have smooth rolling so that you can roll the shaft on it. And what that lets you do, as I grab an arrow to check with, is you can spin the arrow, and there are a couple ways I'll use this for checking. I'm trying to make sure that the camera shows as much as possible here. So one thing I'll do as I spin it is I'll look out at the end and see if the end's going wobbly, which tells me that there's something in the area needing to be straightened. The other thing I'll do is I'll put it out for me a little and kind of get down, and I'll look at the space between the shaft and the front edge of this and see if I see the shaft moving it all out of square. So in this case, I may have actually grabbed one. Nope, I see just a little in here. There are a couple straightening tools if you buy an actual arrow straightener. This one is called a shaft tamer. These are hard to find anymore for some reason. I don't know if the company's gone out. The other kind, the most common kind now, is it's a hex-shaped handle and with a roller, and it's designed so you hold it and you push on the arrow shaft. This is designed so that I will set this here. There's a curve here. When you straighten, what you're doing is you're trying to push against the curve to flatten it out. So in this case, the curve goes like this. So I'm going to push against that on this, just kick gently and roll it a few times and try to get that curve out. Now, another thing that you can do with this, and that got out, but there's something down at that tip. Another way you can use this, so I'll try to find this other curve right there, is you can get so the curve's pointed up, and this is where you could use that hex handle tool, or you can use the weight of this, and you can actually push down on it gently to try and straighten that out. With the hex handle one, most of the videos I've seen with how to do it, they literally put one end on the thing and hold the other side and press against it. So a couple different ways. An alternative tool to this, because again, these are often $30 to $40, is that if you have a large socket from a socket set, if it doesn't have any burrs on it, you can use that as a round object to press against. The idea is you don't want to have a burr that's going to cause a scratch or damage to the arrow. The nice thing about this is it has that whole groove, so it kind of keeps the arrow curved. With a flat socket, you want to be careful not to put too much pressure, or you might actually flatten the side of your arrow, which it would still fly, but it could affect the way it flies and the consistency you get. Yeah.
If you want to get really serious about that, Tim.
Sorry?
If you want to get really serious about figuring out where your bend was at. And you could actually get a dial indicator with a mag base and put it on your straightening tool, since it looks like it's made out of steel. Actually, you can get the total run out of your shaft.
Oh, okay,
That actually point exactly where it's bent at, the worst part of the bend, so the center of it, basically.
nice. Okay. Yeah, another way that I've seen people do is if they have a table they know is flat, they'll just roll it and look for where it's wobbly on the flat table. And that Everard is good at doing it that way. I have actually an astigmatism in each eye, so the assistive tools help me a lot more with figuring out where it's at. Because another way some people can do it is literally just looking down the arrow shaft.
Yeah.
And especially if you can do it so that you're getting it hit by like some sort of color, it can help you to see if the color reflection is off of being, flat. And so that can help you sight down and find a bend. Any questions or anyone else have a different way?
Well, I use the table method
You
myself,
do? Okay.
just because it's quick, it's simple. And I just flick them and let them roll on their own and see if it goes whopping, whopping, whopping across. And then you look for the individual bend. And then I just lean it against the table and I use my hand and just rub the top and see if that
Sure.
works. And I've had a couple that ended up looking like corkscrews afterwards, but that's kind of rare.
Not for
Well,
me.
and cedar often looks like corkscrews, so.
Yeah. One way I check them, which doesn't tell you where it's bent at, but it tells you if it's bent. Just put the tip in your palm of your hand and spin it.
And spin it.
If
Yeah,
it
okay.
wobbles in your hand, then you know it's bent. Then you still gotta find where it's bent at, straighten it.
Yeah. And that's, so I was just gonna realizing I hadn't discussed field repair. So that's a great one to use out in the field because you don't need special tools. And the other way is if you do look down it and you see it's bent, if you mark the spot, and you can often do a little bit of pressure by hand that might at least help get you a little more consistent shooting while you're out at that tournament or competition until you take it home and actually go through and use straightening tools. Okay, so I think from that point we'll go, one of you mentioned tips, so I will go to that next. And for that, I'm going to take a moment and grab some other stuff off the floor. So for tips, we typically use high temp hot melt glue. This can come in a long cylinder. It can come in a little, a really wide, narrow, round cylinder. It can be like,
Holy cow.
what brand is this? Is Boning Feral Tight. There we go. So
Oh,
these are some different types. I've recently gone back to the Feral Tight. It seems to work well. I had some troubles when I first used it. It's very easy to get this stuff too hot and end up with gray and white marks on your hand from burning yourself like crazy because this stuff, again, it gets really hot and really liquidy when it's melted, whereas the other stuff doesn't seem to get quite that bad. But once you learn how to control and not overheat it, I'm finding it's working really well for me. So again, in a home environment where I've had the luxury of buying tools, actually, I think this one was given to me from my former Arcos. So we have an alcohol burner. Other options, especially out in the field, well, at home, you could use actually like a propane torch. A lot of people use those. What I have for my field kit is a butane refillable little torch, which allows me to do a quick heat and repair when I'm out at an event. So what I need here is,
Tim, at home, I have a really nice hot air gun that I use because it doesn't start the glue on fire and it doesn't discolor it.
oh, nice. Yeah, I don't have a gun that gets that hot, so
That's
I
100
use the
degrees.
I use the alcohol burner, and I use denatured alcohol. Okay, so I had already filled this one with an alcohol burner. You have to let it sit and soak a little while, or else you're just burning the cotton wick and you're not getting the alcohol to actually wick up through it and be what's burning. So first thing on this, so this is an arrow that the tip came off of, which means I want to put a tip back on. I happen to have the tip, but there's glue residue. So I'm not worried around the sides. That's going to heat up when I put the new glue on, but the end, there's a bit of glue, and I'm going to try to peel that off. And this may have been on here. Yep. This has been on here a while, so we will take the option of grabbing a sharp knife. And we'll just very carefully try to get right at the edge of the tip of the knife and the glue and roll it. There we go. And it just kind of breaks off usually. We want to remove that because that's, again, we already know that's old glue that failed because the tip came off. And so we want fresh glue to take that space inside the tip to hold it on. So once that's done, what I do is I hold the glue into the flame for a few. Again, I'm getting more familiar with this stuff and how long it takes. And then I rub it around. See, it's already dripping. I already got it too hot.
It's not on camera, Tim.
Oh, okay. So what I did was I rubbed the glue around the tip. So I just sit here spinning the tip against the glue. And then there was a bit of glue sticking between them. So I burn that off. I'm gonna tilt this up just a little without getting my face in the flame. Okay, so now I put the tip on. Obviously the glue's cooled down again. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the tip in the glue, or the tip in the heat. And I'm gonna slowly turn it. And what this does is this will heat up the tip, and then it'll heat up the glue underneath. And I'll know that the glue underneath is heated up because the tip will actually start moving around on the shaft, which it just started doing. Then I'm going to push down on it. I'm going to blow on it a little to try and help cool it. And I'm going to rotate a little and hold down. And I'm going to do that several times. And what that does is that tries to help make sure that I've actually centered the tip so it's straight instead of being kicked off to one side or the other. Because by rotating it and pushing it down, you're putting pressure at different points. So you're helping to center it up.
Yeah, your tip is right behind your torch.
Yeah, I know.
Not much to see.
Just a moment. Since I'm only doing one there. So again, you want this as straight as possible. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing down fairly hard. And then every couple seconds or so, I rotate it a little and push down. And so what that does is tries to even out the pressure and where it's centered in the tip. You'll notice that you get, it may actually be too little for the camera to pick up. So I'll hold this closer in just a moment. So I usually hold it close to a minute just to let it cool down, and then I'll set it aside. And usually if I'm doing a dozen, in fact, that felt like that may have just popped. Every once in a while, you'll get a little bit of an air bubble when you're doing this, and you'll kind of feel it pop, and that can mean redo it all. But I'm trying to find out. Not feeling, okay. So normally if I'm doing a dozen, like I'm making arrows, I'll do about a cycle of about 3. And then once the third one's done, I'll go back to the first one. It's usually cooled enough to peel the excess glue off. And then I'll do the fourth and peel off the glue from the second. So what I'm talking about is, let's see if this gets even close enough. You'll notice that it's not much, but there's just a little bit of a ridge of the hot melt glue around the top of the arrow tip. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that cool a little bit now. And then I will go back, and once it's cool enough, you can just peel it off with your fingers. And then just for the sake of showing tools, I had mentioned a butane torch. So here's just a little refillable butane one that I just keep in my kit while I'm out at events.
Well, one thing I do that's a little different than what you do, up to getting it hot and getting the tip actually onto the shaft, I do it the same. But I use a small piece of leather in my hand, and I have a cup of water next to me. And I then take the tip and screw it on, basically. Just keep screwing it that way, the glue gets all the way around while blowing on it. And once it stops, it doesn't want to move anymore. Then I dip it in the cold water to cool it the rest of the way off, set it aside and peel the glue that came out afterwards. But
Okay.
I found that I keep them straight that way. When I do the push thing, every once in a while you'll get one that wants to go wonky. And by screwing them on, you're keeping it straight all the time.
Okay. And yeah, I thinking about it, I remember that Thomas McDonough, who uses a torch, always had water and would dip his in water at the end too. I had just had a fleeting thought, which no, I can't think of it. If you're doing screw-on tips, then they're a bit different in that you have to have some sort of pliers, or Top Hat sells some specialty tools that don't have threads that you can use to tighten onto the tip to unscrew it. And for those who haven't seen it, you literally end up with the wood threaded, and then you just screw the tips onto the threaded wood. So they have a threading tool. They have a compression tool, which when I first got them, I had to use every time, but I've noticed that the variations in shaft diameters now, most of them are not quite what they say they are. So you get 11/32 and they're a little to the lean side, so you don't really need to compress it, and you just use the threading tool. But those are fairly quick to put on, take off, can make things easier. The one thing I've found with them is that they're more consistent in weight. So if you're really trying to dial in the weight of your arrow or bolt, they're good for that. It can be interesting trying to take the tips off out at an event, because you don't normally want to carry all those extra tools with you that are special to the Top Hat screws, screw and tips. So, okay.
Yeah,
Hey.
one thing that I've noticed, Tim.
Yeah.
The 11/32 screw-on tips, because they only come in 11/32.
Nope.
They'll actually screw onto a 5/16 tip also. Leaves a little bit of a ridge, but they do screw on and they work. So in a
And-
pinch, you can replace a 5/16 tip with a screw-on 11/32.
Okay, and I actually buy 5/16 screw-ons, so
The Top Hat brass ones.
yep.
I gotta find out where you get those at, 'cause I have never found them.
And I'm having fun because my kit just came apart. Yay. Yeah, well, I'll deal with the kit later. Yeah, they're not easy to find, but I've done like I think Margaret Palmer's arrows. I put the 5/16 and in fact Wren's, which I thought were here, but I guess I put them back downstairs to keep them safe from cats chewing on feathers. Have the 5/16 screw on brass bullet points.
All right, I'll have to find those.
So, yeah, probably, I think I found those ones at Three Rivers. Normally, I end up buying stuff from Lancaster, but I think those ones were at Three Rivers. Okay, so let's see. And then again, if you're out at an event, you can use a butane torch or something. It's easy to throw a stick of this into a kit or, whatever glue. I usually try to carry a couple extra tips just in case. The hard thing can be, again, I'm not going to throw this in a kit that I'm taking to an event normally because it's kind of big and bulky. So you might end up just using a table, or like Alexi mentioned, if you have a bit of leather, that would be an easier to transport repair kit. So, okay.
You really want the leather because your fingers do not like to grab that metal.
No.
Oh, they do, but only once.
Okay, so let's see. On to the next thing. So we've done straightening shafts, we've done tips. So we'll move our way back and we'll do replacing a fletch. So you notice this is a 4 fletch and one of the fletches is almost all gone. There are a couple different potential challenges to this, and that one of those is who made your arrows and how did they handle the knock with the fletches. So since this applies to both replacing the knock and the fletches, let's pull this up. So this is one version of a fletching jig. This is, I think this is either the grayling. No, this is my Martin. I was gonna say I have a Martin and 2 graylings. So Martin grayling Bitzenberger. Joe John makes a multi 6 arrow fletcher. Are the common fletching jigs out there. You have an adjuster here that lets you rotate this to kind of fine tune where the feathers are going on. The one thing that I've found with that is frustrating is if you look at, again, I'm hoping this will show up. If you look at the alignment of the knock, the fletches are a little bit off from what you would expect. So you'd expect the knock to be aligned this way so that the string's going through, but it's a little bit off. And the same with 3 fletch. And that's the way the jigs are made. So when I was originally learning to make arrows, what I was taught was we pressure fit or tape on the knock, we do the fletching, then we take the knock off, center it and glue it on. The problem then is if you then have to replace a fletch, it's not going to be aligned right in your fletching jig. So if you're in that situation, you may end up just stripping all the fletches off to refletch, or you could end up using like some fletching tape and eyeballing where where the fletch looks like it's centered. Unless anyone has any other way that they do it to help them get it centered. I know one guy back east who used to be an Avocal, who he whips all his fletches on, and he uses hide glue, or in some cases he may not even be using glue. So he'd just redo the whipping with the new fletches and be good. But if you're doing fletching jigs and that, you have to make sure it's aligned. So what I'm doing is I'm checking the jig first, but you'll notice because of the way it's all ripped up. Okay, so that's where I'm gonna want that jig. I need to clean this all up first because there's too much stuff in the way. So what I like to do is I grab a knife. In this case, I happen to have a Leatherman, and you can do this with a flat knife, or what I sometimes will do is I'll grab I think this is the rope knife. So it's actually a slightly serrated blade, and that works well because you can get it to follow the curve of the arrow shaft. But you have to be careful because if you dig in too much, you're cutting away the arrow shaft, and then you're not going to be refletching it.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll try and get like just behind the back, and I'll just carefully kind of try and gently work it, because again, I don't want to put so much pressure that I'm cutting into the arrow. And I'll apparently be sweeping later because I'm ending up with it all over the floor. So what I'm looking for is to get this as smooth as possible. So I'm trying to get the fletch and the old glue off. So now that that's done, it looks more like that. There's no bits sticking up. So now I'm going to put it back into the jig, hopefully. I'm going to grab, I use Duco cement, which looks like this. It's available at McClendon's. It's available online Amazon. A lot of people will use, was it Fletch Tight? You can use super glue. All kinds, anything along those lines. They're all kind of a variant of super glue. They're pretty much the same formula, but like Duco and Fletch Tight are a little thicker, so they don't run as much, which is why they tend to be used more for this type of work. And saying that suddenly reminds me that some kingdoms use super glue to put their tips on. So obviously for them, what I just showed would not work as a way of replacing them. That tends to be the kingdoms where it's really cold and they reapply their super glue once every month or so. That thinking of Avocal. Okay, fletching jigs. Most of them have a gradient lines on one side or the other. They're also set up, you'll notice this says left, so this is a left wing jig. Fletching jigs are based on which wing the feather is, so right wing, left wing, or straight. Everything I do with left wing, so I don't have to try and remember to grab the right jig for the right set. I know some people who just do right wing. So I have a left wing fletch, I have a left wing jig, I've put it in, I'm gonna clip this down. It fits magnetically to the jig, so that it has a strong magnet to hold it in place. And what I do, just from time doing this, I've learned put the butt end against the back and then click it down, and that should keep it aligned where it's going to be. And what I'm doing is I'm checking if I'm putting it in the right place or not. And what I find is no, that fletch is a gradient mark too far forward. So it wouldn't be aligned with the others. So I'm going to change it. And I'm going to check again. So much easier to do when you're not trying to show a camera. Okay, so what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the backs to basically be aligned. Because if you have one far forward from the others, it could affect flight. For fletch, it may not matter that much. I haven't experimented to try, because as long as I'm able to align it, then I'm going to try to align it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold this. I'm going to take the Duco cement and I'm going to put a small bead of glue all the way along the fletch. And now that I said that, I will, oh, it cooperated, yay. Sometimes what you get when you first try to get the glue out of these tubes is nothing, 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 and then a big blob, and you end up having to wipe it all off and start again.
I get a big blob than an air bubble.
Which is why I use fletching tape instead. I cannot do a straight line with that stuff.
So that's now glued on. The magnet holds the pressure down. That'll sit for about 10 to 15 minutes and it's good. I will put a dab of glue in front and back to help just lock the fletch down and keep it from having the chance of coming loose and, you know, hitting a finger on its way as you're shooting or things like that. An alternative and a great one, especially out in the field, as was just mentioned, is fletch tape, which is just a small double-sided tape. So you can fit it to the fletch, stick the fletch on. Again, I would recommend putting a little dab of glue on front and back to just help keep it in place, but that's a great quick field repair for being able to continue tournaments and that kind of thing.
Tim, my experience with the fletching tape is that it doesn't like being left in a car on a hot day.
No, it doesn't.
This is true. I was gonna say, mine's looking a little bit sad. I think it got left in a car in a hot day.
So, okay, so I got to ask at this point, how do you go about fletching crossbow bolts?
Okay, so crossbow bolts, of course, I don't have that jig up here. So if you're using the same type of bolts, which is to say they don't have a knock, they just have a nice hard flat end, the new grayling fletching jigs come with a bolt receiver, which is just a round rubber bit with pieces that stick out, so you can shove this into it and it'll hold it. Prior to that, what I was doing was I was taking painter's tape and an 11/32 knock, and I would hold the knock on there and I would tape it on. I'd look at it and make sure it was straight, and then I'd use one of these jigs. And then the other piece of that is a lot of us are using 2-fletch for crossbow. And so what you want is a 4-fletch jig, and you're going to use every other. So you're going to click it twice to get to the other side to put the other fletch on.
That seems kind of difficult. What I use for my bolts with 2-fletch is I just take a plastic knock and pressure fit it onto the bolt in the correct place. Then with my jig, I just put it in where it belongs, do one, carefully take it out, and you want to grab the knock, flip it 180 degrees, put it back on, and put the other one on. It comes out the same. And then you
Okay.
just take it off.
So you haven't
What
been
I
able.
did,
Go ahead.
I took a 2x4, cut a notch in it, the diameter of the shaft and half the width of the shaft. Lay the shaft in it and draw 2 lines on both sides. And then I just glue the fletch on manually following the line.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't had any luck pressure fitting them, so I ended up taping them on to make it work. Another, just had a thought of another way I've heard people do it, and now I'm suddenly forgetting. Oh, if you're actually making instead of already have it, in use, I've heard of people. So I do 16-inch, so it's half a shaft, so I have no spare wood there. But I've heard of people who use a full shaft for one crossbow bolt, and what they'll do is they'll leave extra on, and they'll cut in a self knock, do it that way, and then they'll just cut off that self knock when they're done.
Oh,
So if you're in the making process, that works. Obviously for repair, that doesn't, because you've already cut that off and now you don't have that spare extra wood at the back of the bolt.
Yeah, either a self knock or taper it for a plastic knock. Yeah, you
Yeah.
cut the self knock or the taper off. So.
Yep.
yeah. All of these are ideas that I've played with, and I've actually got 183 shafts I can play with. So I'll figure something out.
Have fun.
Yeah, the one that saved me so much time was finding the grayling with the bolt receiver, because you literally just shove it in there and then you go. You don't have to fit anything onto it or tape anything on, so it makes it a lot easier. Okay, so that's through fletches. Now the next thing is knocks. We were already talking about the fact that self knocks, it's pretty much true self knocks, cutting to the shaft is pretty much, can you file it and still use it? Basically remove any chance of giving yourself splinters. Is it still usable, or did it break so much that the arrow's done? The period style hardwood glue-ons you can replace just like you can replace the plastic ones. Assuming that the damage is only to the knock and that not a split shaft as well. So I happen to have an arrow here with half a knock remaining. There are a couple ways to replace knocks. The one I prefer at home is heating up some water in a pan. And then you just dip the knock into the water for a while. You have to be a little careful because the Duco or Fletch tight that you used on your fletches will also loosen up if you get it warm enough. So you don't want to have the fletches in the hot steam too long. But what you can do is you can heat up the plastic knocks for a while, grab them with pliers, and they'll pop loose. If you try a little bit and they don't pop loose, let go, put them back in, let it heat up some more again, and then try again. Usually with about 2 tries, I get them to pop off, and that prevents damaging the arrow shaft any. The alternative, which is more what I would tend to do out in the field, is grab a knife. Again, I prefer my Leatherman because it's got a good handle for grabbing. And what I'll do is I'll slowly go around the edges and I'll just carefully push in and kind of twist up to try and pop the plastic up as I go. And I'll go all the way around doing that. The thing you have to be careful of is that you're not digging into the shaft, because you dig into the tapered shaft and pretty soon you have nothing to glue a new knock to. So I can actually pull it out and demonstrate this briefly, because I will, this being one of my nice arrows, I will probably be taking it out and using the hot water method when I get ready to do that. But so the idea that I do is I hold it kind of down and away from me, and I get this in, and I'm just barely kind of pushing in to try and get a bite on the plastic, and then angling up to help pull that away from the shaft. And then I'll just keep working my way around doing that so that I'm getting a little deeper and a little deeper under this. And eventually, same kind of thing, you'll get to the point where you've broken enough of it away from it that it'll just kind of go pop and the rest will come off for you. Obviously, it's really easy to, put this on a leg and cut your leg. So be very careful with this method, but it does work out in the field for getting this off and then gluing a new knock on. One other thing I would point out as to the previous discussion of wanting the knock to be aligned right for replacing fletches should the need arise, is you may want to have a marker or a pen of some sort that you can either, if you have an indexed knock, you could draw a line from the index just down onto the shaft. So you make sure when you glue the new one, you align the index. Or if you have, like these ones are plastic, there's a seam right here. You could always mark where the seam is so that you can align the seam on the new one. So you at least get it really darn close to the same alignment. So it's going to be easier if you have to replace fletches on that arrow. The hardwood ones, I've had to replace one because it split in half, which made it easy to pull the other half off, because you could literally see the tapered end of the arrow and that half the knock there. So it was just peel it off. I haven't tried the hot water method for that. While it would certainly work with the glue, it's the same glue. I'm not sure that, because if the wood gets wet, it's going to swell, and I'm not sure what the results are going to be, if they're going to be, if you'd still be able to well, use pliers and get it off, or if you'd end up with wood fragments all over. So
Tim, what glue are you using on your knocks?
again, I'm using Duco, but Fletch tight, same type of glue.
I wonder if for those wooden ones that heat gun would work best, because then you don't have to worry about the water or open flame or anything.
I bet it would. As long as you're careful not to burn it. Yeah, I bet the heat gun would break that loose.
I've never tried it. I've always used a knife similar to what you've done to get the nocks. Because usually by the time I hit them, there's less left than the example you showed.
I'm gonna tilt this back up because I'm tired of looking at my shirt. Yeah, yeah, I've only done, I have one set personally of arrows that I've done the wood nocks on. The issue I ran into was the nocks coming loose right after I made them, and what I realized is that the wood and glue wouldn't bond to the sealed shaft, so I had to sand off the sealant on that tapered end and then reglue them, and that they held. So when I made a set for someone else, I literally, first thing I did after I, wet, dry, sand, straighten, cut to length, taper, glue on the hardwood nocks. Then they got included in his back dip, so the nocks were the same color as the back dip, and basically incorporate them into all the rest of the process by having them already glued on. Any questions about anything so far? There's only one more real maintenance thing I can think of.
So I may have missed it because my kids came in and needed a hand, but did you say how to pull the tips off if they're damaged and didn't come off on their own?
Okay, I would do the same thing. I would use either a torch, butane torch if you're out in the field, alcohol burner, and you just heat up the tip. You want to have pliers to grab it because, yeah, I've touched some accidentally. After I pulled them off with pliers and set them on the table, bang the table, they start rolling. I just inadvertently reached to stop it from rolling and regretted it. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll heat it up, I'll pull it off with pliers, and I'll try and set it aside where it can cool down before I try touching it.
Yeah, I do blacksmithing too. I understand the grabbing hot metal on accident.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and sometimes they're most of the time, tips are reusable, but like especially the screw-ons, I make an extra effort to make sure I recover those before I throw away the broken arrow. But yeah, and one thing I've kind of seen that if you hit a rock, if you hit a post holding up a target butt, a bolt, wood frame, you can end up compressing this tip onto the shaft, which can mean you've actually damaged the shaft. But the other thing is you can end up just damaging the tip. You can flatten it out. It still flies, it still sticks in targets, so that doesn't make it a bad arrow tip per se. Now, if you notice it's bouncing off of your particular ones, like Adiantum, I know is using the Egertex, which are pretty tightly wound. You may find in certain circumstances you need the nice point for it to stick consistently, but for the most part, the tip is not bad just because you flattened the front end.
Yeah, mine look like a beak. They're like,
Yeah.
Okay, that might be a problem.
Avina had
I know
one.
it is. I found that out last Saturday when I was shooting them. They kept going left.
Well, that's why the Leatherman had the file also.
Yeah. Avina had one that I'm not sure what it hit. And I'm not sure if it was when I was shooting them or if she was. But it hit something. I retrieve it and I'm walking back and I kind of hear this rattle. Like, that's weird. And I look down and the tip is missing and there's a hole there. And what happened was the tip broke and got pushed down into and so it was rattling around inside.
Oh,
I was like, I have never
Oh.
seen that before or since.
Well, I've had the very tip break off
Yeah,
so that all of a sudden I've got a blunt in my hand
yeah.
with steel around it. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't seem to hurt the shaft at all. I don't know what it hit, but there must have been something bad in the metal.
Yeah, and that's what I wonder on that particular one, because again, I've not seen that before or since. So I'm thinking maybe there was just a weak spot or it had, it was maybe made just a little too thin to match diameter specs, and it ended up just hitting something just right and pushing the tip into the tip. So, okay, this guy's actually should be done by now, so I'm gonna pull this out. And for those who are wondering what I was talking about, what I do, while I remember which fletch it is I take just a little dab of glue right on the front of the fletch and a little dab of glue on the back of the fletch, just to help keep it in place. So if you ever have to pull it through a bale or anything, it gives it a little better chance of staying attached to your arrow instead of being pulled loose. Because if you have, if you have a ridge there from the fletch, and it's easy for it to get caught on stuff and to pull off. And then
When I make arrows or both, after everything else is done, I gently run my finger from the front of the shaft to the back over the fletch. And if finger catches at all, that gets another coat. Because if you got to pull it through a bale or whatever, it's going to come off if it'll catch. And I use clear fit nail polish for that.
okay.
And because it comes with a nice little brush and you can just.
It does. Yeah, you can brush it right in
you
place.
just brush it on there wherever it needs it. And it's easy.
I've done several sets of arrows where I actually take some serving thread and wrap the, like a 1/4 inch before the edges of the fletchings and into the fletching, and that often can help keep them down. There's also some lacquer that you can brush on to keep the wrapping from coming unraveled.
I've tried wrapping feathers on, and I made one that actually sort of kind of looked okay, but I found that I'm not one of those people who can do that. I mean, if you want a dozen arrows done like that, yeah, it would take me about a month.
Yeah.
So I don't do the full
actually-
wrap. I just do it to protect the tip from getting.
Well, I understand that, but it's like, I keep trying it, and it looks like it was done by a really stupid 4-year-old.
So you glue them on or tape them on and then wrap afterwards. So the wrapping is just more decorative.
Not even use, I always glue them on anyway, but I keep trying it and I can't get them, first 2 will be like this, second 2 will be like this, then there'll be 2 right together, then there'll be one way over here. And it's like, nah, forget it. I'll take a pen, take a pen and draw in between the fletching if I want it to look like it's been done.
I use a couple of techniques I learned several years ago when I learned to tie fishing flies, and it works out really well for getting relatively consistent lengths of the wrap.
Well, my dad tried to teach me how to tie flies too, and after about 2 hours, he said, "Forget it, just go buy them."
Oh wow!
And there's a confidence builder.
Yeah.
He was right. I'm a klutz, and I can't. There's something about that kind of stuff I've never been able to do.
So I'm not sure how well the light's going to show, but here's the fletching jig. Here's the receiver. And I don't think this is quite showing. There's a crossbar in this for the arrow nocks. Most of the jigs you buy have an insert for 3 fletch, an insert for 4 fletch. And then the grayling at least also has the replacement front piece. So instead of the crossbar, it's a round rubber piece that you can push the back of the bolt into. so that you don't have to have any kind of knock on it. You just put it in the receiver and put your fletches on.
Yeah, mine is a BP Pro. And it'll do up to 6 fletch or any angles you really want, because it's actually got a complete protractor on the back. And
Wow,
you can just set it for whichever you want, and like I say, up to 6.
nice.
I've
And
got
for-
the same jig and it's very, very adjustable, which I found isn't necessarily good.
Of course, I use a straight jig instead of the that other one.
Helical.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the damn word. I have a helical, but I've always had trouble with those staying on. So I just went with straight, and since we're shooting, 40 yards or whatever and all that, it seems to work just fine.
Okay, is there any questions, or is there anything I've forgotten to cover?
Tim, I don't know if it's something you forgot to cover, but this is a habit of mine from a couple of decades ago when I did competition pistol shooting. What we always did was we number our magazines, so if you had trouble with a magazine, you could identify which one it was because it had a number on it. So I
Mhm.
always number my my arrows. That way, if I get one that's consistently flying off to the left or right or whatever, I know it needs some attention. My last set of arrows that I just made a few weeks ago, what I've done in the past is I've tried using a Sharpie to number the nocks or on the shaft. What I did this last time was I actually took some paint and I drew the number on with paint, and then I dipped it so that number doesn't come off, because I found that
Yeah,
other methods it comes off.
I use a ballpoint pen on mine because, well, it works. And first thing I do is I weigh them on my grain scale because I reload. And I'll lay them out from the lightest to heaviest, and I'll mark them 1 through 12 or whatever from lightest to heaviest. That way, if I'm shooting in a competition 1 through 6, basically the difference in grain is half of what the total is. And they seem to be more consistent, but also because every once in a while you'll get that one that decides it wants to go into Never Never Land. And if you know which one it is, you can go, okay, that one goes in the loaner equipment or something.
Yeah, we're not going to use it today.
yeah. So yes, I'm aware of a lot of people who put numbers on, sometimes with pen, sometimes other ways. I was actually, before I became OGGS, my Arcos had mentioned, you're probably going to want to number your bolts so you can tell if, as you're saying, if one of them's flying weird and it's consistently the same one, it gives you that ability to say, okay, this one's got an issue, I need to work on it, and pull it out, shoot the others. I've only once numbered my bolts, and so what I did was I put the number in binary in the cresting for the set of 24 bolts I made. But before that and since then, I've never numbered my bolts.
So when I used to think that having everything absolutely perfectly matched weight wise, I used to actually weigh all of my shafts, weigh the fletchings, weigh the tips. And I used that glue that you used.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually break it off into chunks and weigh it. That made the difference between the weight of the tips. So obviously you can't melt it and put it on a shaft like you demonstrated. I would break it off and weigh it. I actually put it in the tip, melt it in the tip by holding it with a pair of pliers, use a torch to melt it, put it on the shaft. That's a lot of work for that little bit of weight. Doesn't make that much difference. So I
Yeah.
learned it was time consuming for not much gain, but
Yeah, I know William Arrowmaker mentioned that he used to do that too. He would weigh the exact amount of glue to make sure he put the exact amount on each arrow. What I've found with crossbow is the weight is important to a point, but the length being the same is more important. Because crossbow is fairly center shot, so it's, so I try to grain match the shafts within usually about 2 grains for mine. And then of course, once you've put sealant on and fletches on, who knows what the variation is by then. Usually it's a little more spread out. But then what I do is I make sure I take them down to the sander and I sand them down so they're within like a 16th or 32nd inch of each other lengthwise. Because when I'm shooting, I'm looking at where the tip is, and that's my aim point. And so
Yeah.
if I have length variation, then the aim point's different for each bolt. With handbow, a lot of people, well, there's different ways to aim. One is using the arrow tip, which means again, you want the arrows the same length. Or you can start using things on the bow, like the edge of the bow for left, right. And if you have a mark or a cutout or something, you can use that to figure out elevation, or the knuckles on your hand, things like that are a little more static than the length of the arrow, and that can help reduce the need to have the arrows the exact same length.
yeah, as long as you're not using that third cloud from the left.
Yeah. I did a
There's
York
nothing
for,
like shooting a York round with a 30-pound bow.
yeah. I set up a York at, what was it? It was North Sound, I think. Yeah, I think they call it North Sound Unity or something like that. They were trying to bring back an old event they had done up north. And so I set up the York in the best place possible. So it had a hill behind it, but the hill was good for 60 yards. If you had a really flat shooter, maybe 80 yards. So 100 yards, it was aim for the sky. So yeah. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to stop the recording. If I remember where to do that, pause, stop recording.